I almost canceled 3 times. The first time was the night before, when I was lying in bed running my thumb over the spot on my ribs, where it would go, and trying to convince myself I didn't need to do this, that it was indulgent, that she wouldn't have wanted me to do something permanent for her sake. The second time was in the parking lot, sitting in my car for 11 minutes with the engine off. The third time was in the waiting area, holding the printed reference image in my hands, watching the door to the back studio and thinking about leaving. I didn't leave. A woman at the front desk told me Marcus was ready, and I followed her through the doorway and into a room that smelled like ink and clean surfaces and something faintly antiseptic. And he was standing at the workstation with his back to me, and when he turned around I understood immediately why his books were full 6 months out. He had the kind of face that looked like it had decided something a long time ago and was at peace with the decision, unhurried, certain. He was covered in his own work, both arms, the side of his neck, the backs of his hands. But none of it was loud. It was detailed and quiet and clearly intentional, each piece considered, nothing accidental. He looked at me the way the piano tuner had looked at the piano, like he was already thinking about the work. "First tattoo?" he said. "Is it that obvious? You're holding the reference image like it might escape." He said it without cruelty, almost gently. "Sit down. Tell me what you're thinking." I had found the image 6 weeks after my sister died. It was a botanical illustration, a particular wildflower she had loved, that grew along the road near where we grew up, that she used to pick and press between the pages of whatever book she was reading at the time. I had found 3 of them in her things when I was clearing her apartment, dried flat, still faintly purple, tucked into books she would never finish. I told him this sitting in the chair while he studied the reference image, and I wasn't sure why. I was telling him except that he'd asked what I was thinking, and I was tired of not saying true things to people. He listened without interrupting. He asked 2 questions, how large and where. "On my ribs," I said. "Left side, where I can't see it all the time, but I know it's there." He nodded slowly. "That's a specific kind of decision." "I know. It'll hurt more there than most places." "I know that too." He looked at me for a moment, not evaluating, not cautioning, something more like respect. "Okay," he said. "Let me draw it up and we'll talk about the transfer." The transfer process was its own thing entirely. He had redrawn the botanical illustration by hand, which I hadn't expected, translated it into something slightly more graphic. Cleaner lines, the kind of image that would hold in skin over years. When he showed it to me, I felt something shift in my chest. It looked like her handwriting somehow, which made no visual sense and was completely true. "This is better than what I brought," I said. It needed to be something that would last. He set it on the light table. "Are you ready to transfer?" I had worn a button-front shirt, which I now unbuttoned and set aside. He handed me a paper drape without making it awkward, and I folded it across my chest while he prepped the area, cleaning the skin methodically, then applying the transfer solution with practiced efficiency. His movements entirely professional and somehow still deeply personal, the way any careful attention to your body by another person is personal. "Breathe normally," he said, and pressed the transfer paper against my ribs. His palm was flat against my side, holding the paper in place. Pressing with even and steady pressure, I could feel the warmth of his hand through the paper. I focused on breathing normally, which became briefly difficult for reasons I didn't examine. "Hold still," he said, and I held still. 4 minutes approximately. Then he peeled the transfer away slowly, checking the impression, and stepped back to look at it. "Come see," he said. I stood at the mirror. The temporary image curved along my ribs exactly as I'd imagined, maybe better. The wildflower followed the line of my body like it had always been there, like it was something that had been waiting to be found rather than placed. I put my hand over it without thinking, just held it there. "We can adjust placement if you want," Marcus said behind me. "No," I said. "It's right." The first session was 3 hours. He worked with the same quality of attention I had noticed from the beginning, total absorption, unhurried, precise. He explained what he was doing as he went, not constantly, but enough that I was never startled, never uncertain about what came next. His left hand was always on my skin ahead of the machine, holding it taut, anchoring me, and I became aware very quickly that the tattooing itself was less discomforting than I'd feared, but that his hand on my ribs, steady and warm and constant, was something else entirely. We talked on and off, the way you talk to someone when there's a physical process requiring your joint participation. About her, about the wildflower, about what it had meant to her and what it would mean to me. He told me he had a piece for his father on his left shoulder blade, something he'd had done 6 months after he died, and that he had never regretted it. Not the decision, not the placement, not the pain. Did it help? I asked. He was quiet for a moment, focused on a detailed section of the stem. Help is the wrong word. It made it real in a different way. Grief lives in your head and your chest, and those are soft places. Sometimes you need to put it somewhere the body keeps. I looked at the ceiling and didn't say anything because I couldn't. His hand moved to a different position on my ribs, settling again, and I focused on the weight and warmth of it and breathed. I came back for the second session 2 weeks later. We had scheduled it for shading and detail work, another 2 to 3 hours. I arrived and he was finishing with another client. And I sat in the waiting area and looked at my phone and was aware that I had thought about this appointment more than was strictly proportional to its practical requirements. When he called me back, the rhythm reassembled itself naturally, the setup, the positioning, the first cool touch of his hand finding its place on my ribs as he worked. I had worn the same button-front shirt. I noticed he remembered without being told which side, which position, how I liked to orient myself in the chair. Halfway through, I needed a break. It wasn't the pain exactly, it was accumulation. The sustained focus of holding still, holding the breath level, holding the emotion that kept arriving unexpectedly in the vicinity of the work. I said, "Give me a minute," and he set everything down immediately, no question, and handed me a small juice from the mini fridge in the corner without being asked. I sat up slowly. My eyes were wet, which I hadn't noticed until the cool air of the room hit them. "Sorry," I said. "Don't." He pulled the rolling stool over and sat down. Not close enough to crowd me, close enough to be present. It happens, especially with memorial work. The body remembers things the mind is still processing. I pressed the back of my hand against my eye and looked at the wall. I keep thinking I'm further along than I am. Grief doesn't really work in a line. "No," I said. "It doesn't." He didn't offer anything else, didn't try to fix it or move past it. He just sat with me in the room while I finished the juice and got my breath back and felt the particular, strange relief of not being managed. "Ready?" he said eventually. "Yes," I said. His hand found my ribs again, and we went back to work. The finished piece took 3 sessions. At the end of the third, he stepped back and looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Then he handed me the mirror. It was extraordinary, not because it was technically perfect, though it was, but because it looked like something that had always been true about me, something that had finally been made visible. The wildflower followed the line of my ribs as if it had grown there. Every detail of the illustration was present, delicate and exact. The petals slightly varied the way real petals are, the stem with its particular curve. I looked at it for a long time. When I looked up, Marcus was still watching my face. Not the tattoo, my face. He had the expression of someone witnessing, something he doesn't want to look away from. "She would have liked it," I said. I was certain of it in a way I wasn't certain of many things. "I think so too," he said quietly. I set the mirror down. He was standing close. The room was small, and the last session had narrowed whatever professional distance had existed at the beginning, the way hours of close physical work will do. I was still sitting in the chair, which put his face at a different angle than usual, closer than the usual geometry of standing. "Thank you," I said. "I mean that in a way that's bigger than the tattoo." He held my gaze for a moment. "I know," he said. "That's the part of this work I didn't expect when I started. What people bring in with them, what do I do with it now?" He considered the question seriously, which I had come to understand was how he considered most things. "You carry it differently," he said. "It's the same weight, but it's on the outside now too, shared with your skin instead of just your chest." I looked down at the wildflower on my ribs. My sister pressed into me like a flower pressed between pages, permanent, kept. I put my hand over it, the way I had at the mirror on the first day, and felt the slight raised warmth of new work beneath my palm. Marcus's hand came to rest over mine briefly, without ceremony, just a moment of acknowledgement. One hand on top of another, on top of something that mattered. Then he stepped back and reached for the aftercare instructions on the counter. "Keep it moisturized," he said, professional again, clear and kind. "Out of the sun for at least 4 weeks. Come back if anything looks off, and if nothing looks off, He handed me the instruction sheet. His fingers held it a half-second longer than necessary when I reached for it. "Come back anyway," he said. "I'd like to see how it settles." It had settled beautifully, he said, exactly as intended. He examined it with the same focused attention he brought to everything, his hand light on my side to angle the light correctly, and I watched his face while he looked at the work and felt the particular, quiet pleasure of being in a room with someone who does not perform their care but simply has it. "It's good," he said with genuine satisfaction. "Yes," I said. I put my shirt back on. He walked me to the front. At the door I stopped and turned around because there was something I hadn't said, and I had made a recent practice of saying true things. "I came in here carrying something I didn't know how to hold," I said. "You helped me find a place for it. That's not a small thing." He stood with his hands in his pockets and looked at me steadily. "No," he said, "it isn't." The afternoon was cold and bright outside. I walked to my car and sat in it for a moment, not because I was uncertain this time, but because I wanted to hold the feeling before it became ordinary. I had her with me. I would always have her with me. I pressed my hand against my ribs and felt her there, kept in ink, permanent and present, and drove home through the cold, bright afternoon feeling, for the first time in a long time, like my body was entirely my own.